We're now on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Omid Beis, and we're talking about a case of Rav Ashi who saw his brother-in-law shapid. Now, shapid is a verb of the noun shpud, meaning he set up the spit, kavda iloi bisra, with the liver on top and the meat on the bottom, which we said lechatchila is a no-no. And Rav Ashi accused his brother-in-law of yuara. Kama yohir. Yohir is the verb of yuara. Yuara means haughtiness. Hai min Rabbanan. He didn't mention him by name, but that rabbi. Emar di Omer Rabbanan di Evet, but lechatchila mi Omar. Then the Rabbanan never let you put the liver on the spit on top of the meat while you're roasting it with that vertical spit in a way that the dam is going to go from the kaved into the meat. And he went ahead and did that lechatchila, which you're not allowed to do. Okay, now we get to something called Beidugi. And I've been working hard to try to understand exactly how this Beidugi works exactly. Be'ika Beidugi is Bisrei Loi Kavda Nami Osu. So now we have a scenario in which even if we put the meat on top and the kavod on the bottom, it's still Osu because of this Beidugi. So he translates Beidugi as some sort of a receptacle that when the fat drips down from the meat, let's say forget about the kavod for a moment. Let's say you take a piece of meat and you roast it, and fats drip down from the meat. So in order to collect those fats, which probably he uses for gravy, he puts a beidugi, some sort of receptacle, right below the meat that's roasting on the spit, in order to collect the fats. And now, even if the meat is on top and the kavod is on the bottom, so the kavod is on the bottom, but the receptacle called the beidugi is below the kavod on the bottom. So the blood that's niflat, that's discharged from the liver, now is filled up, is caught in the beidugi. Now, that should have no impact on the meat on top, but rather on the fats that were collected from the meat on top in this beidugi. So I think what we're saying, Nami Osir here, means not that the meat itself is Osir, but the fats that collected the Beidugi are Osir because they're mixed now with the dam that comes down from the kavod. Now, the Gemara asks the following question. Let's take ordinary meat, a piece of meat. And we said that you could kasher a piece of meat and remove its dam through the roasting process, even without malicha. And now you have a beidugi. Umaishna midama de bisra. I don't get it. There's dam in every piece of meat. Forget about kavod. And although normally we get rid of that dam through malicha, but in the case of roasting of tzli, we don't need malicha. So you're roasting a piece of meat with a beidugi on the bottom, and now the dam that's coming out of the piece of meat is collecting together with the fats that are collected by the beidugi in the beidugi. So the Gemara gives a very strange answer, which I'm trying to work out. Dama de bisra shachan. Right, shachan means when you settle down something. So the blood in a normal case of meat will go down to the bottom of this beidugi, of this receptacle. But the fats that he's collecting in the beidugi from the roasting process of the meat somehow settles on top. And all he has to do now is skin off the fats from the top, leaving the dam on the bottom. And that's not a problem. So again, we're dealing with some law of physics in which when you've got blood dripping into the beidugi, you've got fats dripping into the beidugi, the fats, let's start with the blood will sink to the bottom and the fats will float on top. However, dama de kavda, coffee. Just like we said that the fats of the meat will float on top of the surface, so too, because of the nature of the dam of kaved, through the process of roasting, the dam of the kaved floats onto the surface together with the fat. And therefore, there's no way you could separate the dam from the fat. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Now we start a slightly different sugya. Sakin sheshachad ba. Now, what happens is when you use a knife to slaughter an animal, the beis hashchita, right, the neck of the animal becomes very hot, and therefore the shchita knife will absorb with that heat the dam from the tzavar, and therefore also lachtov ba roseach. You can't cut hot food with a shchita knife because the hot food is going to cause the dam balua in the shchita knife to be polit. Sonen, however, if he cuts cold food with this shchita knife, then according to one opinion, he needs hadocha. You remember that hadocha means to rinse something off. Amrile, according to one opinion, by hadocha, the amrile lo by hadocha. Now we have to know that if you require hadocha to wash clean the surface of that piece of food, then l'chatchila you're not allowed to do it. So that even though you're cutting cold food, you should not cut cold food with a shchita knife. And basically a shchita knife here in this context, halachically, is symbolic or representative of any knife that was used to cut fleishiks, and now you want to cut milchiks, or it was used for treif, and now you want to cut kosher meat. Now, let me just see if he tells you how we paskin. No, I don't see it. Right, when we use salt from a licha and we remove the dam that's inside a piece of meat through salting, and now he has a receptacle that receives the blood that was extracted from the meat, that receptacle should not be used for hot food because there's some element of blia of the dam. Now, where's the blia of the dam? I don't get it. Unless we're applying the principle of moliach harei hu kiroseach. Yeah, salt causes a food to impart its flavors. Shmuel etatmei. Shmuel is consistent. So this we had already in the past. And and therefore, since he's salting the meat and the blood through the salting process is going into this receptacle, therefore it's as if he heated up the blood in this receptacle, and therefore you cannot use that receptacle for eating hot food. And the same thing applies to pickling. Let's say in vinegar or spices, it causes the food to impart its flavor to another food present in the pickling solution, as if they had been cooked together. Kiyasa Ravin. However, we have another Shita. He says when he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said name Rabbi Yochanan, Liach Eino Keroseh, Kovish Eino Kerevushal. I don't get it. We know that these are basic principles in taroves and mixtures. How could it be that Ravin attributes to Rabbi Yochanan that he denies these principles? Amar Abaye, Had Ravin Lessa. Forget about what Ravin taught you. That can't be so. Tahi Pinka Dahavi Bei Rav Ami. Pinka is like what's called a kliyadama, a piece of pottery. So there was a pottery plate that's made of clay, and it was in the house of Rav Ami de Molech, so they used to use it for salting meat. And the blood from the salting used to go into this earthenware bowl. Vitavre and Rav Ami broke it. And why did he break it? He wanted to make sure that no one would use it. And who's Rav Ami? Rav Ami is the outstanding student of Rabbi Yochanan, so we could rely on him that whatever he did was alpi the psak, the ruling that he got from his Rebbe Rabbi Yochanan, Bichti, Rebbe Ami Talmud Rabbi Yochanan. My time at Tavri, why did he break the plate? La mishum de shmiel le minei Rabbi Yochanan the yom maliach harei kosayet. So we know now, based on Rav Ami and breaking that plate that was used for malicha, that malicha is considered roseach according to Rabbi Yochanan. Yosef Rav Kahana Achua de Rabbi Yochanan Rav Huna. Yosef Ka'amar, Rav Kahana presented the following ruling. Ka'ara shemolach babasar asur lecho baroseach. Again, the same principle is being applied that maliach hareu kiroseach. Utznon. Now tznon is what's called a dover charif, a radish. And if you cut a radish, or for that matter, an onion or a lemon, anything that has a sharp taste to it, then we have duchka de sakina, the pressure of the knife in the dover charif, right, is tznon shechatcho be sakim utaliachlo bekusach. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what are you telling me? You're telling me that when I cut what's known, a radish, then I don't have to worry about duchka de sakina, and I can eat that radish with milchiks? I mean, we just finished saying that ka'ara shemolach basar, right? Moliach harei kusech, you're not allowed to eat it with hot food. My timer. So apparently, this whole presentation of kahana requires some sort of explanation. What's the difference between the first case of ka'ara shemolach basar and the second case of tznon shechatcho b'sakim? Rabbi, the difference is haya terubola v'haya surabola. We could be mekil in the case of its known because the fleishiks that imparted a tam in the knife is hetera. There's nothing osur about that meat. But in the case of the plate or the bowl that absorbed the tam through malicha of the dam is isura bola. Now again, on this line of the Gemara, we would have to shtel probably for an hour or two just to work this out. And any kula that we have in Hilchus Pesach with regard to Tarovas is based on this principle that a Terah Bola, because the chametz in its time was mutter. In any event, this is how Abaye attempts to make this differentiation and justify Rav Kahana. Amalei Rava. Rava says to Abaye, you're making a big mistake. Ki bola hetera, my havi, what significance do you give to the fact that the meat knife that gave off a tam into the radish is a tam of hetera? Why is that significant? Sof, hi hetera di asli de asurahi, di surah ka'achal. What are you telling me? Okay, you're telling me that he cuts the radish with a fleshika knife, and that's called a terabola. But what difference does it make? Now it's got a blia of meat because that was a fleshika knife, and we said there's blia even bitzonen because of a davar charif together with a dochka de sakino, and now you're taking that radish and you're cooking it in a dairy pot, meaning with dairy ingredients. Isura achal. Now he's going to have meat coming out of the knife because the knife was bolea meat going into the milchiks. He's got milchiks and fleishiks. Elam or Rava says we have to come up with a different justification of Rav Kahana's tznon shechatcho bisakin shel basa mutar lochlo bit kutach. Kutach is dairy. Ha efshal limitame v'hailo efshal limitame. Okay, you're about to take this radish and mix it into the kutach. Stop. First, someone tastes the radish. Does he taste meat, a flavor of meat in the radish, or does he not? In the case of dam, you can't do that. We're not going to allow you to take a chance and endanger yourself and figure out whether or not there's tam or not. Not only that, we're talking about a kara. I don't even know how you would sample that. Amalei Rav Papa Rava. Rav Papa's not happy with Rava. Like so Rava wasn't happy with Abaye. And he says to him, what are you telling me? You want to know whether or not the blood gave off a taste, and therefore you want to put it into a plate of hot food. Basically, I'm going to give it to a kfela. I'm going to give it to a non-Jewish chef, and he's going to taste it. He'll sample it. Milo Tanan, didn't we have a Mishnah that says that Kedera Shabishal Babasa Lo Yivash B'Cholav V'Im Bishal No Saint Tam B'No Saint Tam B'Shel Bishal B'Truma Lo Yivash B'Chulim Bishal No Saint Tam V'Amrina Bishle Mitruma Toim Le Kohen Ela Bas B'Cholav My Toim Le. If you cook meat with milk, how are you going to taste it? Nobody's allowed to taste it. It might be Bas B'Cholav. And V'Amrina Le, and we say no. The Tami Kfela, we give it to a non-Jewish chef and let him taste it. It's Ochadavi Tami Kfela here too, in the case of hot food that was placed into a plate that absorbed the blood of the salting of the meat. We're going to give him the hot food, and we're going to ask this Armenian to please taste it and tell us if he is there a taste of dam. And Rava says, Hochinami, you're right. We are allowed to give it to a kfela and rely on him to tell us whether he tastes the dam or not. Kika mina delek kfela. I was only referring to a case where there's no kfela. Itmar dogim shalu bakara. This is the famous sugya called nat bar nat tehetera. Nat stands for no saint tam, bar no saint tam. So what's the case? Dogim shalu bakara. Fish was cooked in a fleshika plate or pot. So now, the fish itself is hetera. The meat itself is hetera. So what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me now that You can't eat it with milchiks? The fish was roasting on a fire, taken directly from the fire, and placed into a clean meat plate. So do we say that the fish now absorbed the taste of the meat, and therefore the fish cannot be eaten with milchiks? Rav Amar Asal Yocha Bekuta. You can't eat it with milchiks because the fish was hot fish placed in a fleshika plate, absorbed the taste of the fleshik, so you can't eat it with milchiks. But Shmuel Omar Mutali Ochlan Bekuta. Shmuel says that this is no Saint Tam bar no Saint Tam de Torah. Why? Because he started with meat that was cooked in a pot. The pot absorbed the meat. You have the fish that was cooked or placed into a hot fleshika plate. That's also no Saint Tam. So it's no Saint Tam bar no Saint Tam, and everything is mutter. Rav Amar also no Saint Tam. Rav says I couldn't care less whether it's one no Saint Tam or two no Saint Tams. The Torah prohibits no Saint Tam. So the fish that was placed in a hot fleshika plate absorbed the tam of basar. And once it absorbs the tam of basar, Rav says, you can't eat it with milchiks. Shmuel Mutter, no Saint Tam bar no Saint Tam. It's a no Saint Tam on top of another no Saint Tam. Why? Because the fish is now getting the tam from the plate. The plate got the tam from the basar. There was never a direct connection in cooking between the meat and the fish. We don't know from Rav that he said that nosin tam bar nosin tam is asur. We can derive it from a scenario because Rav ikul lebei Rav Shimi bar Chia barbre chash b'yena. So Rav had an eye. So they prepared for him some sort of an ointment for his eyes of dulei shaifa bitzah, some sort of an ointment they prepared for him. And this ointment was made of herbs. Basar hachi, sometime later on, ramu le bishula begava. Right? They used that same plate in which they prepared the ointment from herbs as a remedy for his eyes, and they cooked food in that very same plate. Toimle tama de shaifa. When they gave the ointment that was prepared in the plate in which they had cooked meat, and apparently this ointment is not just placed on the eye, but it's also swallowed, I guess. And Rav makes a comment. He says, this ointment tastes like meat. Omar, he declares, he was very, surprised. Yoiv taima kuli hai. Okay, now let's try to figure out what that means. Yoiv taima kuli hai. Right, we said that Rav, in the case where the fish was placed in the meat plate, prohibited putting the fish into a milchik concoction. And why is that? Because the fish absorbs the taste of the meat, which means that the fish has the propensity of drawing out the taste from the meat which itself gave tam into the plate. Rav tastes the ointment, and apparently the ointment had the propensity to take out the taste of the meat from the plate. So Yoav Taimakule Hai, right? The ointment itself is so powerful that it somehow absorbed the taste of the meat. So we see from this story that according to Rav, if you have a plate that was used for fleishiks, and now the plate absorbs the taste of the fleishiks, then if you put something hot, or in the case of the ointment, because of the nature of the ointment, onto that plate, it's able to take out the tam, even though it's not barnat. Velohi, shiny hasam dinofish merora tfe. There's something about the ointment in its makeup, it's very bitter, that gives it the ability to draw out the taste of the meat. But that's an exceptional case. The herbs used to make the ointment were extremely potent, and their flavor remained strong. All that can be deduced is that Rav would hold that a taste of food that is as strong as the herbs remains potent, even in a not barnat situation, but a simple meat flavor, however, and it goes, we're talking about two transmissions, then we don't know what Rav would say about that. So the fish and the meat and everything else, that's not similar to the herbs. It's got a simple meat flavor, and maybe it becomes weakening when it's meat into the plate into the fish, two transmissions, not barnat, and it should not be equated with the case of the ointment, which is extremely potent. Rabbi Elazar Havi Kon Kamidimam. Okay, Rabbi Elazar was in the presence of Shmuel. Aisu Kamei Dogim Shalabakar. They gave him exactly this case of fish that was placed into a hot meat plate. And Shmuel had no compunctions about eating it with milchiks. Yoav Levelo Achal. However, Shmuel now turns to Rabbi Elazar and says, please enjoy it with me. Rabbi Elazar refuses to eat it. Amalei, Shmuel says, L'Rabcha, Yoav Levi Achav Hat Lo Achla. I could testify that such a dish was given to Rav, fish that was placed in a hot plate, and it was eaten with kutak together with milchiks. Are you more religious than the Pope? I mean, your own Rebbe would eat it. Asalikami de Rav. Wait a second. Rav's original psak was that dogim she'olu bekara asur lochlam bekusa. So Rabbi Elazar comes back to Rav and he says, Omalei hadabe Rav, Mara Mishmait, have you retracted your original ruling? Omalei chas leila zari di abba, bar abba, delispeli midi delo svirle. I think, if I understand correctly, he's admitting that he changed his mind. Let me just see if he points this out here. So if I read this correctly, Rav is denying that he changed his mind, and he denies that the whole story took place. Meaning when Shmuel said your Rebbe Rav ate such a thing with milchiks, that never happened. So there's a whole discussion here. How did Shmuel say that Rav ate the dish? Shmuel had in fact served Rav such a dish. He was under the impression that Rav knew that the fish he was serving had previously been placed hot into a meat plate. And Shmuel Shitaso held that that was mutter with challah. But Shmuel knew that Rav had previously ruled not barnat is forbidden. He reasoned that if Rav still held by his original ruling, then he would not eat the dish. In truth, however, Rav was unaware of what transpired with the fish, and so even though he had not retracted his ruling, he ate the food. Seeing that Rav ate the dish, Shmuel believed, in all honesty, that Rav had retracted his original ruling. Rav, on the other hand, never became aware, even after the incident, the fish had been placed in a meat plate. So therefore, he denied that the episode ever took place. Rav Huna Rav Chia bar Ashi Havi Yasve Chad Bahai Gisa de Mabra de Surah Bahai Gisa de Mabra de Surah. Right, so Rav Huna Rav Chia was sitting on two sides of the Surah River, and Lamar Aisule Dogim Shala Bekarvi Acha Bekusach Lamar Aisule Te'enim Anov Besoch Hasuda Vi Acha V'lo Parich. So there were two incidents here where one of the two Chachamim ate Dogim Shala Bekarvi Bekutach, the other one ate Te'enim and Anovim in the middle of his meal, and he didn't make a brach on them. Mar Amal Lechavri, one of these Chacham turns to his friend and he says, Yasma Ovid Rabcha Hachi? Is this what your teacher taught you? Meaning that you're allowed to eat Dogim Shalu Bekara Bekutach? Umar Amal Lechavri, the other master said to his friend, Yasma, are you an orphan Ovid Rabcha Hachi? Mar Amal Lechavre. So the first one who ate the fish that was heated in a meat pot together with milchiks hano kishmul spirule, umar amalei lechavre hano kiravichia spirule. The Tani Rab Chia pas poteres kol mini machal, since he ate the figs and the dates and the grapes in the middle of the meal. It's part of the meal, and if it's part of the meal, you don't make a brach on it. The yain poter kol mini mashke. Omar Chizkiya mishuma baye. Hilchas adogim shalom b'kara mutal yochlam b'kusa. We paskin like Shmuel, and you're allowed to eat the fish that was heated in a meat pot together with milchiks. Tznon shechadcho b'sakin. However, in the case of a dova charif, like a radish that was cut with a knife that was used to cut meat, also liochlam b'kutach. We're not allowed to eat it with milchiks because the knife is duchka de sakira, and the kutach is and the tznon is a dovachar. Hani mili tznon. That only applies to a radish, which is a dovachar. And now we turn to daf kuf yud beis. The agav churfei bola, as a result of its sharpness, it absorbs the taste. Aval kishos, if you cut a vegetable like squash, gar lebe piske v'achil, right, just scrape off the surface area, and you can eat the rest of the vegetable with milchiks, because a squash is not sharp, it doesn't absorb. And kilche de lifta shari. If he cuts turnip stalks with a meat knife, you're allowed to eat it with milchiks. Or silka, if he cuts stalks of beets with a meat knife, asiri. Apparently, the stalks of a beet are very sharp. Like radishes, beets are sharp and absorb the meat flavor. I don't think we paskin like that, but anyway, ipasach behu delifta. If he cuts the beets with the stalks of turnips, shaper tummy, then he can eat the beets with kutach. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today. And tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, everything should go well. Shah Tov Mitzlachas. And